My parents forced my girlfriend to dump me for my rich cousin, saying, "He can offer you everything he cannot." I left without a word. Years later, at a grand event I hosted, they turned pale when they saw who I had married, because standing next to me was. Imagine waking up one day and realizing the people who should have been your biggest cheerleaders were actually orchestrating your downfall. 5 years ago, my own parents systematically tore apart my relationship, not for my good, but to push my girlfriend directly into the arms of my wealthy cousin. Can you even begin to imagine that kind of betrayal? My name is Lucas, I'm 28, and back then I still believed family meant loyalty. I thought my parents were proud of me, or at least content. But in reality, I was just a placeholder, a stepping stone in their endless pursuit of social climbing. It started subtly. My girlfriend, Emily, and I had been together for 2 years. We weren't rich, but we were happy. I was building my career at a small architecture firm, and she was a teacher. We shared a one-bedroom apartment that was far from glamorous, but it was ours. Filled with laughter, takeout dinners, and the occasional leaky faucet. My parents? Well, they didn't exactly hide their disappointment. Every time we visited, my mom would slip in comments like, "So, Lucas, any plans to move to a bigger firm?" Or to Emily, "Have you ever considered a different career? Teaching doesn't really elevate you." My dad just sat there, silent, but nodding along to every backhanded remark. At first, I brushed it off. They'd always been like that, obsessed with appearances, obsessed with money. I figured as long as Emily and I were happy, their opinions didn't matter. Then came the cousin, Ethan. My mom adored him. "He's so ambitious," she'd gush, "so successful." Ethan worked in finance, drove a shiny black car that probably cost more than our apartment building, and had this smug, charming grin that made people trust him even when they absolutely shouldn't. I'd never been particularly close to him, but suddenly, he was at every family gathering. And my mom always made sure to invite Emily too. At first, I didn't think much of it, until I started noticing the little things. The way my mom would insist Emily sit next to Ethan at dinner so they could talk about travel, because he'd been to such amazing places. Or the way my dad would lean over to me, half smiling, and say, "You could learn a thing or two from Ethan." I even caught my mom whispering to Emily once, her voice low, but her words clear enough. "You know, Ethan could give you everything you've ever wanted." When Emily came home that night, she was quieter than usual. I asked her what was wrong, but she brushed it off. Still, over the next few weeks, she seemed distracted. I'd find her scrolling through travel websites late at night or staring off during dinner. My parents, meanwhile, doubled down. They invited us to a weekend at their vacation home, just to relax. But when we arrived, Ethan was already there. My mom greeted us at the door, practically glowing. "Oh, isn't it perfect? Now you can all spend some time together." I remember feeling like an outsider in my own family's home. That weekend was the first time I felt it. That gnawing suspicion that something was happening behind my back. My parents were attentive to Emily in a way they'd never been before. My mom poured her wine, asked about her childhood dreams, told her she was too special to waste her life struggling. And Ethan? He knew exactly what he was doing. He was charming, attentive, listening to every word she said like she was the only person in the room. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, but deep down I knew. The breaking point came a month later. Emily sat me down one evening, her hands trembling as she spoke. She said she needed to think about her future, that she wasn't sure we wanted the same things. And then she told me my parents had been honest with her, that they thought I'd never be able to give her the life she deserved. She didn't say Ethan's name, but she didn't have to. I could see it in her eyes. I wanted to fight for her. I wanted to scream, to tell her my parents were manipulating her, that Ethan wasn't the answer. But something in her expression told me it wouldn't matter. She'd already made her decision. So I just sat there, numb, and listened as the life I thought I was building fell apart piece by piece. And when she finally walked out the door, my parents didn't even pretend to hide their satisfaction. That was the day something inside me shifted. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply walked away. From Emily. From my parents. From the idea that they would ever see me as enough. I told myself I'd never look back. What I didn't know then was that walking away was the first step toward building something far greater than I could have imagined. And that one day, they'd regret every single word they said. But before that day came, I had to hit my lowest point and start climbing. In the months after Emily left, the air between my parents and me was thick with unspoken judgment. They didn't just distance themselves, they seemed to actively push me further to the sidelines, like I'd failed some unspoken family test and was now irrelevant. Calls from my mom became rare. And when they did come, they were transactional. "Your cousin just got promoted again," she'd say, skipping right over any question about how I was doing. Or worse, "Ethan and Emily are going to Bali. Can you imagine?" I told them they deserve it. I'd sit there gripping my phone, my chest tight, forcing myself not to react. It wasn't just that they favored Ethan. It was that they wanted me to see it, to feel it. Every holiday gathering became a stage for them to flaunt his success and the life Emily now had. At Christmas, my parents hosted dinner at their house. I almost didn't go, but I knew if I skipped it, they'd take it as proof I couldn't handle seeing them happy. So I showed up, wearing my best suit, determined to keep my composure. The moment I walked in, Ethan was there, standing beside Emily in the foyer. She looked different. Her hair was lighter, styled in some expensive-looking way, and she wore a dress that probably cost more than my rent. My mom's voice floated from the kitchen, "Lucas, don't they look perfect together?" The words hit like a slap, but I forced a smile, murmuring something polite. Dinner was worse. My parents seated me at the far end of the table, not even next to them, while Ethan and Emily sat at the center, flanked by my mom and dad like they were the guests of honor. Conversation flowed around them. Ethan's latest deal, the property they were thinking of buying, the charity gala they'd been invited to. Whenever I tried to join in, my comments were either ignored or brushed aside with a quick, "That's nice, Lucas," before they went right back to fawning over Ethan. Halfway through dinner, my dad clinked his glass and announced that Ethan had just bought a penthouse in the city. "You should see the view," my mom added, beaming at Emily. Then, with a glance down the table at me, she said, "Lucas, maybe you can visit sometime. It might give you inspiration." The room erupted in polite laughter, but I caught the smirk on Ethan's face. It was the same one he wore back when we were kids, and he beat me at something smug, knowing he'd won. After that night, I started noticing how deep their favoritism ran. When my birthday came around a few months later, I didn't even get a call. I found out later my parents had spent the weekend at Ethan's lake house, and Emily had posted photos of them all toasting on the dock. The caption read, "Family is everything." I stared at that post for a long time, not sure if the knot in my chest was anger, sadness, or both. Then came the worst of it. My mom invited me over one afternoon, saying she wanted to catch up. Foolishly, I went. She greeted me at the door, all smiles, then led me to the living room where Ethan and Emily were waiting. "We thought it'd be nice to spend some time together," she said sweetly, but her eyes had that calculating glint. The conversation started off civil, but soon Ethan began talking about a business opportunity, a small real estate investment, and how he was thinking of letting the family in on it. That's when my mom leaned forward and said, "Lucas, maybe this is your chance to finally get on the right track. Ethan could mentor you. You could learn how to build something for yourself. Maybe then you could attract someone like Emily." She said it as if Emily weren't sitting right there, as if my worth was measured entirely by who I could date and how much I could spend on them. I sat there, every muscle in my body taut, trying not to let them see how much it stung. That day, as I drove home, I realized something. They weren't just being cruel. They wanted me to feel small. They wanted me to accept my place beneath Ethan, beneath their expectations. But if there's one thing about me they never understood, it's that I don't break quietly. And that's when the idea started forming. Not for revenge yet, but for escape. I knew I had to get away, cut every tie, and build a life so far removed from theirs that one day they wouldn't recognize me. I just didn't know yet how far that journey would take me, or how much higher I'd climb. It happened on a rainy Thursday, one of those days where the sky feels like it's pressing down on you. I was at work, buried in a project deadline, when my phone started buzzing relentlessly. At first, I ignored it. But after the fifth call in a row from the same number, my mother's, I stepped outside to answer, bracing myself for whatever trivial crisis she'd cooked up. Her voice was unusually calm, almost rehearsed. "Lucas," she began. "I wanted you to hear this from me before you saw it online." My stomach sank. She paused, like she was savoring the moment. "Ethan and Emily are engaged." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. My mind scrambled to process it. The same Ethan who had hovered around her at family gatherings. The same Emily who swore she just needed time to think when she left me. My chest tightened. I asked, my voice flat, when. "They got engaged last night," she said, almost cheerfully. "We had a little celebration. It was beautiful." You should be happy for them, Lucas. They're perfect for each other. I could hear clinking glasses and faint laughter in the background. They were still together, celebrating. I don't remember what I said next. I think it was something short, maybe just I see. But what I do remember, crystal clear, is the moment I hung up and felt the weight of it hit me. It wasn't just that Emily had moved on. It wasn't even just that she'd moved on with my cousin. It was that my parents had facilitated it, encouraged it, and now they were flaunting it like it was some fairy tale ending. By the time I got home that evening, the news was all over social media. Emily had posted a photo of her and Ethan on a balcony, the city skyline behind them, her hand raised to show off a glittering ring. My mom had commented, "Couldn't be happier for you both." My dad had liked every single post about it. And then, buried in the comment section, I saw it. A family friend writing, "Didn't she used to date Lucas?" Followed by someone else replying, "Yeah, but she upgraded." I wish I could say I brushed it off, but the truth is, I sat in my apartment for hours staring at that ring, the smiles, the celebration I hadn't been invited to. My parents had chosen sides. No, they'd gone beyond that. They'd actively pushed me out of my own life. The final blow came a week later when I received an invitation in the mail. It was for their engagement party, hosted at my parents' house. The card read, "Join us in celebrating the union of Emily and Ethan, a match made in heaven." There was no handwritten note, no attempt at softening the blow, just a printed card addressed to me like I was any other distant acquaintance. I didn't go, of course. But the night of the party, I drove by. The driveway was lined with expensive cars, the windows glowing warm with light. I could hear music and laughter spilling into the damp night air. Through the large living room window, I caught a glimpse of my parents raising their glasses in a toast. Ethan with his arm around Emily's waist. Something in me hardened in that moment. It wasn't anger anymore. It was resolve. This was my breaking point. The moment I knew I'd never play their game again. I wouldn't beg for a place at their table. I'd build my own. And one day, it would be a table they couldn't even dream of sitting at. I turned the car around and drove away without looking back. That was the night I started my real escape plan, the one that would eventually set everything in motion for what was to come. The weeks after the engagement party felt like a long, cold winter that wouldn't end, even though the calendar said it was spring. Every part of my life seemed to slow down, like I was moving through thick mud. Work became mechanical. I showed up, I finished my projects, I went home. My apartment, once filled with little signs of Emily's presence, now felt too quiet, like the silence was pressing in on me from all sides. I didn't have much of a social circle outside of her, and the people I thought I could lean on either didn't understand or didn't want to get in the middle of family drama. The few who did check in would say things like, "You'll meet someone else." Or, "At least now you know the truth." As if that was supposed to make the betrayal sting less. It didn't. Bills started piling up. I was still paying off my car, rent was due, and I didn't exactly have a safety net. My parents had never offered to help me financially, but they made sure I knew they were spending generously on Ethan and Emily's new life. My mom once accidentally sent me a text meant for Emily, asking her if she wanted my parents to cover the cost of the honeymoon as a gift. She didn't even apologize when I called her out, just said, "Oh well. You saw it anyway. It's not a big deal." The loneliness was the worst part. Some nights I'd find myself scrolling through old photos, seeing the smile on Emily's face when we took weekend trips, remembering how my parents used to at least pretend to care about my life. Now, they spoke to me like I was some distant relative they barely knew. On the rare occasion I visited, I felt like a stranger in my own family's home. My room had been turned into a guest room, complete with stage decor, a perfect backdrop for when Emily and Ethan stayed over. One evening, after another long day at work, I sat in the dark at my small kitchen table, staring at a piece of mail from my parents. It wasn't a letter, just a glossy flyer for a charity gala they were helping host. On the front was a photo of Ethan and Emily from a previous event, looking like the perfect couple. My parents had written, "You should come. It might be good for you to network," in my mom's looping handwriting. Something about that moment, the quiet, the cheap overhead light buzzing above me, the staged perfection of their world pressed into my hands, made me realize I couldn't keep living like this. I was stuck in their shadow, and they wanted me to stay there. But I wasn't going to. I started saving every extra dollar I could. I stopped going out, cut every unnecessary expense, and began researching opportunities outside the city, anywhere I could start over where their reach wouldn't matter. At first, it was just a vague idea. Move somewhere new, get a fresh job, rebuild quietly. But over time, it became more deliberate. I looked into certifications, found a couple of business mentors online, and started teaching myself skills that could open doors. I didn't tell a soul, not my friends, not my coworkers, and definitely not my family. The hardest part was keeping my head down when my parents kept testing me. They'd call to brag about Ethan's promotions, send me photos from family vacations I wasn't invited to, or accidentally mention how much they loved Emily's taste in decor when I visited. I learned to respond with a neutral, "That's nice," and then let the silence stretch until they were the ones scrambling to fill it. Underneath all that quiet compliance, though, I was building something. I didn't know exactly where it would lead yet, but I knew I'd get out. And I knew one day, when they least expected it, I'd be standing in a place so far above their condescension that they'd choke on the sight. But first, I had to disappear. And that part was going to require more than just packing a bag. Leaving wasn't dramatic. There was no big announcement, no confrontation. One morning, I packed the essentials into my car, clothes, a few keepsakes, my laptop, and drove out of the city without telling a single person where I was going. I left my phone number the same, but I stopped answering calls from my parents unless absolutely necessary. If they wanted to picture me stuck in the same small apartment, still struggling, I wasn't going to correct them. I moved to a coastal city 3 hours away, a place where no one knew my name or my family's reputation. The rent was cheaper and the air smelled like salt water instead of exhaust fumes. I found a small apartment above a coffee shop and started a new job at a mid-sized design firm that actually valued my work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. And for the first time in years, I was surrounded by people who respected me for my skills, not my bank account or my last name. That was just the foundation. In the evenings, I poured every spare hour into an idea I'd been sketching out since the lowest point of my life, a side business designing high-end custom interiors for vacation homes. At first, it was just me and a few clients I found through local ads. Then, one client recommended me to another, and that one brought 2 more. Word of mouth spread faster than I expected. Within a year, I was making more from my side business than from my full-time job. By the second year, I took the leap. I quit the firm and went all in. I hired a small team, rented a proper studio space, and rebranded under a sleek new company name. We specialized in complete transformations for luxury coastal properties, and soon our designs were being featured in regional magazines. I went from scraping together bills to signing contracts worth more than my annual salary used to be. Along the way, I changed too. I traded my old worn-out clothes for tailored suits, learned how to network with high-end clients, and started attending events I once thought were reserved for people like Ethan. My confidence grew with every deal closed, every property reveal that left clients speechless. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something entirely my own. And then came the milestone that shifted everything. A call from an international property investor who had seen my work online. He wanted my company to handle the design for an entire chain of luxury villas. The contract was massive, more money than I'd ever imagined earning in a single project. Signing it meant not only financial freedom, but the ability to expand my business beyond anything I'd pictured when I was sitting alone in that dim kitchen years ago. I bought a home. Not just any home, but a sprawling waterfront property with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that stretched out to the horizon. I drove past the gates every day thinking, they wouldn't believe this is mine. I started attending galas, charity events, and high-profile openings, not as someone's guest, but as a sponsor, a name on the invitation. The funny thing is, I still kept my success quiet from my parents. They probably thought I'd disappeared into mediocrity, still struggling while Ethan and Emily lived the dream. Let them think that. The longer they underestimated me, the sweeter it would be when the truth came out. Because by now, I was being invited to the kind of luxury events they lived for, the ones they boasted about for months. And it was at one of those events, years later, where everything would come full circle in a way I couldn't have scripted better if I tried. But before that night came, there was one more move I had to make. The one that would ensure they'd never see it coming. The setup began without me even realizing it at first. Success had opened doors I didn't know existed. Doors my parents and Ethan had spent years trying to keep shut in my face. Every high-profile project I completed led to new introductions, property developers, investors, event organizers, even a few local politicians. I wasn't just designing spaces anymore. I was building a network, one that reached into the very circles my family worshipped. It was during a private dinner hosted by one of my wealthiest clients, a sharp, silver-haired woman named Marianne, that I learned the piece of information that would change everything. Between courses, she leaned in and said, "Lucas, you should consider co-hosting next year's Coastal Heritage Gala. The right visibility could triple your client list." She said it casually, but I knew what that event was. It wasn't just any gala. It was the crown jewel of the social calendar in my hometown, the very same one my parents and Ethan treated like their personal stage. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, gears were turning. If I was on the hosting side of that event, it meant my name would be on the invitations, my face in the press, and my influence recognized publicly. And more importantly, it meant they would have to walk into a room where I wasn't the overlooked relative lingering by the buffet. I was the person they'd have to greet as an equal. I told Mary and I'd think about it. But the truth was I'd already decided. I started investing more into my public image, professional photo shoots, press interviews, and sponsorship deals that put my company's name in places my family couldn't ignore. I even secured a partnership with a luxury brand that supplied decor for some of the most exclusive events in the region. It was subtle, but the threads were weaving together. Meanwhile, I kept hearing bits and pieces about Ethan and Emily through mutual acquaintances. Their perfect facade had cracks. A business deal Ethan mishandled. A renovation project Emily started but never finished. Rumors of financial strain despite their expensive vacations. My parents, of course, pretended everything was fine, still posting polished photos of family dinners and special celebrations. It was all image, no substance. I didn't interfere. Not yet. I wanted the contrast to be glaring when the moment came, their forced smiles against the reality of how far I'd risen. By the time the invitation to officially co-host the Coastal Heritage Gala arrived, my business was thriving on an international level. I'd opened a second office overseas, hired a PR team, and secured a client roster that included celebrities and CEOs. The gala committee welcomed me like I'd been part of their inner circle for years. They even gave me free rein over the event design, which meant every guest, including my parents, would be surrounded by my work from the moment they stepped through the door. The date was set. The venue was a historic ballroom overlooking the water, dripping with chandeliers and echoing with the kind of old-world prestige my family idolized. I signed the sponsorship papers, approved the guest list, and made sure my parents' names were right there, front and center. And just to twist the knife, I extended a personal invitation to Ethan and Emily, addressed formally from my office. No explanation, no personal note, just a gesture that would leave them wondering why I wanted them there. I had no intention of telling them beforehand who else would be standing beside me that night. That detail was going to be the part that made them freeze in place when they walked into the room. The night of the gala arrived with the kind of crisp, clear air that makes everything feel sharper. Sounds, colors, even the tension in the room. The ballroom glowed under golden light. The tables set with pristine linens, crystal glasses catching the flicker of hundreds of candles. Every flower arrangement, every archway, every elegant seating area had my company's signature style woven into it. My name was printed on the entrance banner alongside Marianne's, big enough for no one to miss. I arrived early, dressed in a deep navy tuxedo, greeting guests as they filtered in. My PR team moved discreetly through the crowd, making sure the photographers caught the right angles, the smiles, the handshakes, the subtle shots of my designs in the background. The plan wasn't to humiliate my parents or Ethan outright. It was to let the setting, the introductions, and my presence do all the work. And then they walked in. I spotted them at the entrance, my parents, Ethan, and Emily. They looked the way they always did for events like this, perfectly styled, polished, and ready to charm. But the second their eyes landed on the banner, I saw it. The split-second pause, the flicker of disbelief. My mother's smile faltered just slightly. My father's hand hesitated before shaking the event coordinators. Ethan's jaw tightened. They tried to recover quickly, but I was already walking toward them, calm and steady. "Welcome," I said, my voice smooth. "I'm glad you could make it." For a moment, none of them said anything. Then my mom forced a smile. "Lucas, you're hosting this?" "Co-hosting," I corrected, shaking Ethan's hand with a grip just firm enough to make him notice. "It's been a great project. I designed the space myself. Please enjoy the evening. There's a lot to see." I didn't linger. That was part of the strategy. Never give them the satisfaction of thinking I needed their approval. Instead, I drifted back into the crowd, introducing myself to influential guests, making sure my parents could see me moving comfortably in a world they thought I'd never belong to. Every time I glanced their way, they were standing a little stiffer, their smiles a little tighter. The moment that sealed it came later in the night, during the charity auction. As co-host, I was invited on stage to say a few words about the cause. The spotlight hit me as I stepped up, the murmurs quieting. I thanked the guests for their generosity, spoke briefly about my company's contributions, and then, without ever mentioning them directly, I talked about how I'd built my business from the ground up, starting with nothing but determination and a vision. I could feel their eyes on me the entire time. When I stepped off the stage, Marian greeted me with a smile and looped her arm through mine. Come, I want to introduce you to some of our biggest donors. That was when I saw their faces change completely. Because standing beside me, laughing easily, was the woman I'd married a year earlier. A woman they had never met. A woman whose elegance, confidence, and kindness radiated in a way that drew people in immediately. And, just like that, they realized that the life they'd thought I could never have, the success, the influence, the love, was standing right in front of them, and I hadn't needed them for any of it. I didn't need to say a word. The revenge was already complete. For the rest of the evening, my parents moved through the ballroom like they were walking on glass. They kept their smiles plastered on, but every time they caught sight of me and my wife, Isabella, deep in conversation with the city's most influential guests, their expressions flickered. Ethan tried to mask his discomfort by over-engaging with anyone who would listen, but I noticed how few people actually knew who he was. In this room, he wasn't the center of attention. I was. Eventually, they approached us. My mother's voice was syrupy sweet, the way it always got when she was trying to save face. Lucas, you didn't tell us you were married. Her eyes flicked to Isabella, assessing, searching for some imperfection she could pounce on. I smiled, calm. We've been married for over a year now. Isabella runs her own art consultancy. She works with clients all over the world. Isabella, ever gracious, offered her hand and greeted them warmly. My father muttered something about impressive work, while clearly trying to process that his son, the one he dismissed as a disappointment, had built a life that outshone the one they'd pushed him away from. Ethan finally spoke. We had no idea you were doing all this. The way he said it, you could hear the quiet resentment under the surprise. I kept my tone even. I know. That's because I didn't need to tell you. And I meant it. Every choice I'd made since that night years ago was mine, untainted by their control or approval. As the evening wound down, I noticed something almost poetic. My parents and Ethan no longer commanded the attention they used to. People gravitated toward Isabella and me, asking about my company, my projects, our travels. My parents had always wanted to be the most important people in the room. But now they were just another set of guests, standing on the sidelines of an event their son was hosting. When they finally left, my mother gave a stiff hug, my father a half-hearted handshake. Ethan didn't even attempt either. They walked out into the night, their postures rigid, their faces tight, and I knew the reality would sink in on the drive home. They had gambled on the wrong person and they'd lost. As the last guests departed and the lights dimmed, I stood by the grand windows overlooking the water. Isabella came up beside me, slipping her hand into mine. You okay? She asked softly. I glanced at the emptying ballroom, at the space I'd created, at the life we'd built. More than okay, I said. They finally saw me for who I really am. And for once, they couldn't do a thing about it. And with that, I turned away from the glass, leaving their world and everything it once meant to me behind for good. What would you have done in my shoes? Have you ever had to cut ties with family who just wouldn't support you? Let me know in the comments below. I truly want to hear your stories.